Hey guys, this is Tina Logassi from Prim Heirloom Designs, and we're gonna do a little clay work today. This is one of my scarecrow pumpkins. I'm gonna show you how I make the heads out of air dry clay. This is how they look after you make them, and then we're gonna go further and I'll show you how I finish them with paint and antiquing wax. So to start, I'm gonna just talk quickly about the clay. So I'm gonna be working today with this clay, and the biggest difference I find, you do need to pick an air dry clay. I find sometimes it can take a few days to dry, just depending on how humid your environment is. When I open up a pack and then I'm not using it for a little while, I do store it in a plastic bag, and I find it lasts for quite a while. Like some of the clay I was working with yesterday was actually from last year, and I just had it in here kind of folded around. It had dried out a bit, but I just dip it in water, work it a little bit, and it's good enough for what I need to use it for. So just to speak a little bit about the tools we're going to be using today, I have this tool, and I will link below the ones I find. I like this one for making the markings on the sides of the pumpkin. You could alternatively use a small knife, or if you had you did wider ones with a crochet or knitting needle. I'm sure you can come up with some other things. Maybe a comb might work to kind of do this action. So that's one tool I enjoy. And then I also like to use one of these for carving out the eyes and the nose. And actually, that's pretty much all that I used for this one. This is one that I tend to use when I'm making heads, like Santa heads, but I don't think I'm going to use that today. I also enjoy putting on a actual acorn for the top. You do not have to do that, but it's something that I find is cute. It's a nice way to finish it off. Oh, and then you'll see that I always, in the bottom, I make an opening so that afterwards I can put it onto my spindle for my scarecrows. However, if you're just making some of these for a bowl filler, or just, to have a little accent piece, you may not even want to do the jack-o'-lantern. You don't need to make a hole in the bottom. So to start, you can use a styrofoam ball. These ones were from a thrift store, actually. They also, I believe, make them nowadays that are made from recycled styrofoam. You can look for that. What I like to recommend is tinfoil. So my husband, when he's cooking and he's got, he's making a dinner and he's using a lot of tinfoil, I actually get him to save it for me, and I'll use it in this way, and because I'll also use it for my Santa heads, which are slightly bigger. So anyways, I would give you the weight that you need to use of the clay. The problem is that I find that the weight varies per brand. For example, this one I worked out 54 grams of clay works for this Craft Smart clay for the size pumpkin that I want to work with. But yours might vary. So if you're working with this exact same clay, weigh out 54 grams and 1.7 grams of tinfoil made into a little ball, and that'll get you there. So I'm just going to weigh 54, and see, it's quite sticky clay, which if it ends up a year older, it's not it's not as sticky. It's actually a little easier to work with. But this is a fresh clay and how it comes. So I've got my clay, and all I'm going to do is flatten it out and roll it around. I like to use something on the inside so that you don't have as much clay. It makes it dry faster, and it's lighter. So there's a couple of reasons for that. And you use less clay, which is economical. So I'm going to, and I always keep water near me to work with it. So I'm just going to start by rolling it around a little into a ball. And then we do want a bit of I should keep one of these over here so you can see. We want to not have it a perfect sphere, right? You want it to be a little smushed. So I'm going to take one of my acorns and already pop it in the top. And I also like to keep a towel near me to wipe off clay goo. And I'm just going to push that in. And as I'm pushing, you'll see like I'm starting to get a bit of a different shape for this, which is great. The end, I've got a 1/4 inch dowel that I use for making the hole at the bottom, and that's my last thing that I do for these. So once I kind of have the shape I want to work with, I'm going to take my sharp tool, and I'm going to start with the nose. So I'm just going to come down here and cut out some of this clay. And if you need to wet your tool so that it's not, the clay's not sticking to it, you can do that. I'm just going to form like a bit of a nose to start. And then the eyes, what I do is I just go in straight with my tool. And then I'm going to kind of lift up this inner edge to kind of create that bit of a triangle that you get for a jack-o'-lantern. And I'm going to do the same for this side. Roughly the same size. Okay. And when my hands start to stick to the clay, I just re-wet them a little bit. And then for the mouth, you can decide how, if you want to do, you want him frowning at the end or smiling. So I'm going to, because I want him kind of frowning, I'm going to start with a downturned kind of, two downturned markings. Then I'm going to go up one and then a small down. And so up one and a small down. This is just how I've gotten to, this is how I've been making the faces. You obviously can do it differently, and that's pretty good to start. And if you find that he's losing shape, you can just come back around like I am and reshaping his edge. But you'll see he's going to go out of shape again when I go to put on the markings around. So this is kind of like my initial marking of where I want everything. Now I'm going to come around and put in, see why I like this tool, it's so cool, these markings to segment this pumpkin, and also give something for that antiquing wax to kind of like sit in to make it have a little texture and character. You can see as I'm doing this how the eyes are starting to close up, the mouth is closing up. Don't worry about that because we're going to come back and fix that in a moment. So now I'm going to come back, go with this one, and I'm going to kind of open up these areas. I have my guideline right there. And same with up here. And usually I find after I do that other work, I'm happier with, I like the nose not being so wide. So that actually works really well for this guy. Okay. I'm just going to wipe my hands. And then the last thing is, because I want a 1/4 inch opening in the bottom, I'm just going to go in gently. Okay. And I'm just trying to get down to that foil, because afterwards, if I need to dig it out in order to get this guy nicely placed, you can afterwards drill a hole. This just is, it's nice to have something to start with, an opening, even if you go smaller than what you need, because then you don't risk like cracking your clay or anything like that. But I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm gonna put him aside to dry. So I've pulled over a pumpkin that I did a couple of days ago. He's pretty nicely dried. And the first step I like to do with these for painting is put a coating of like a primer. So I've got gesso here, which is essentially, it's an acrylic and oil primer. And I find that if you don't do this, the clay, like the clay is still kind of continually drying for quite some time. If you go to paint it directly onto this clay, it won't take the paint very well. So sometimes you got to add my gesso is very thick. It's probably just older. So I'm going to just lighten it up a little bit. You can just look for a paint primer. Mod Podge would also create that barrier to your paint. I just find that if I don't do this layer and I paint directly on, it almost like it continues to absorb the paint, and then you end up with some spots that just don't look right. So I'm not going to really bother doing that, the top. If I get some on it, it's okay because I'm going to be painting it orange anyways. I'm not too worried about getting inside of the mouth. And afterwards, we're also going to finish it with a layer of Mod Podge. So I'm going to let that dry. All right, so now that my Mod Podge is dried, I'm going to come in here. I've got this, it's very old, this Martha Stewart antiquing wax. And this is when I'm going to come into these eye sockets with a very fine brush and paint them in. I like to do this first because if I mess it up, I'll be going over the outside with the orange anyways. You could also just use like a brown or a black paint on the inside. Okay. And I can go ahead straight away with my, I'll start with my first layer of my orange paint. So I've got an orange spice color paint that I like to use on this because I'm not going to be putting this inside of those areas. So I can just go ahead and start on the outside. So I'm just going to now take this paint and starting at the top, and I do end up doing the acorn as well. Doesn't have to be perfect because it but just kind of blends it in, and usually I end up with getting clay on it anyway, so it just hides it. You may find if you're doing the acorn, if it has not set in, you may have to glue it in place. I've got a few where they didn't take to the clay, and so afterwards I will just hot glue the acorn top set in to where it needs to be. And when I come in, I can see that I missed a whole area. I don't know if you can see that. So after I'm done this, I'm going to go back in to a couple of spots with my wax. Okay, and once I've got this first layer on, I'm going to rest it on its back to dry. Yeah. So that's kind of the first coating. I'll come back and do this next. I'm just going to let that part dry for now. Okay, so you can see this is how this is coming. That side's dry. So I'm basically just going to keep painting around. I like to do 2 coats. So I'm going to do a second. I'm going to finish this back, do a second coat, and then come back. Okay guys, I am back and I've got, this is 2 coats of paint. You can go more, but I think 2 is plenty. And I've got my decor wax and I've got a paper towel here. And all I'm going to do at this point is kind of focus this in my folds or go over it. And then I'm going to rub it in to give it a bit of a antique-y kind of a look. And I'm just going to go around the whole thing. If you find, and I think I'm going to do this, if you want it to go on a little thinner, because mine is, like I said, it's a bit older, I'm just going to pull some out here and add a little bit of water to thin it a little bit so it won't go on as heavily and I can spread it a little better. I find it works best for me if I do it kind of in sections, and it's just going to get caught in those little divots that you have. And what I found is if I don't seal underneath first with Mod Podge or a primer, when I do this part, sometimes my under color, my orange will lift off too. And see it's starting a little bit there. I think it's because this wasn't quite dry enough for me to work with because I want to show you, but this gives you an idea. I should try to, if I can, focus it on those lines, and then I can go over it. And you can also add a bit of water at this point and go over it too if you want it a bit lighter. Let's see how that goes. So just play with it. So after I'm done this step, the last thing is I like to give it a nice coating of, I like the glossy Mod Podge, but it depends on what look you are going for. Either will work. So I will come back with that. I've got the antique wax on here. It's all dried as well as all of the paint. So the last step with these pumpkin heads is to do a coating of Mod Podge. I like to use the glossy one on these, but you can also use the matte depending on what your final purpose is with these. And I'll just end up putting just a single coat, I find, is enough for these. And then once that dries, I'm gonna go ahead and I will do the back half. So just like that, let that dry, and then flip it over and do the same on the other side. All right, and here you see the final pumpkin head. So these are awesome. There's so many uses for them in crafting and in the falls. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider subscribing to my channel. It's free and the button's below. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope you have a great week. Happy crafting.